452. 452. Let's sing. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages where His praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the healthy storms of doubt appear assail, by the living word of God it shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord. God living firmly with the strong cord. Overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot walk. Listening every promise His Spirit's call. Resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Hymn number 539. 539. Let's sing. I'm pressing on the upward way, through life's unchanging every day, still praying as I walk, when my feet on high road ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, my faith confess it will win. From my me up and let me stand. My faithfulness it will land a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high and catch a gleam of glory bright, but still I'll pray till stable land a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. The song after this will be 943. 943. Oh, yeah. We left off on Paul's second preaching tour in Athens. And actually, I kind of messed up 2 weeks ago. Well, there's really only 3 verses of him left in Athens, but they do make a good point. And we want to think about that, or look at that a little closer, and see the point here. It's basically the results of his preaching on the Areopagus. And it tells us that when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. And that's when he left the Areopagus, not Athens. However, some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius, the Areopagite. Y'all know how to say that better? Teach me. A woman named Demarius and others with them. So it reminds us, and though we don't necessarily see letters being written to Athens or anything, it does seem there was a church established there at that time. And, having that thought and recognize that sometimes we get the idea that preaching is not always fruitful. Is that true?
Only God knows. That's a broad question.
What does God say?
That's all it's for.
He says, "My word will not return to him void." It's going to do what it's supposed to do. So whether we see Christians being converted, it's bearing the fruit it's converted. It's either condemning men or converting men. And that is its job. He says, "It will not return to me void." And that's in Isaiah 55. Yeah, and so it's a reminder says, and sometimes we get blessed, we don't see something, but yet here it is, and sometimes it may be just planting of seeds. Brother Maurice Davis came in one Monday morning telling how that Saturday he had baptized a man that he had not seen for almost 35 years. Didn't even remember it. But he remembered a lesson that he preached 35 years ago, and it always ate at him, and he came and found him. So we don't know. Paul makes that statement. I planted, Apollos watered, God gave the increase. So that's why I kind of like this, because sometimes we look at that, we read verse 31, and we don't get down to verse 33. What stays in our mind is 31. In fact, I remember some people, when we were in Athens, some of the group were asking our tour guide that took us to Athens and Corinth, and he was the minister of the church. They had 400 members, and people going, that's not that many people for this size of the city of this size. It's 400 members. Maybe it's not that many compared to some others, but you know, considering the culture that it's in, that's a pretty good group to me. It's such a size congregation, they had to have 3 services. One in English, one in Greek, and one in Russian. They had about 100 members that were Russian. So before we question something, we ought to really step back and look at it.
Well, God used a few people to do His will in history.
Yeah.
Very few.
You know, and that's the thing, we look at that, but we don't, and that's the thing I think sometimes we know we're going to be among the few. Many are called, but few are chosen. We know that in the grand scheme of the population of the world that's ever populated, the saved are going to be the lesser group. But it doesn't mean it's a small group. So he goes from there and he goes to Corinth. What's important about Corinth? A lot of things. Verse 1 of chapter 18 picks up that after these things, Paul departed from Athens, went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to them. Now, from what we understand, we don't, as far as we know, he did not know Aquila and Priscilla until now. Okay? And it would seem not only were they Jews, what else were they? Christians. Huh?
The same trade as he was.
And we're going to see that. We'll get to that in the next verse. But we'll point out that because we don't read of him converting them. Yeah. And in verse 3 and 4 it tells us, so because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. Sorry, I used the English translation of Sabbath. But here's that point there. It's that same thing he does. That's his habit. He goes to the synagogue. And I like the term reason. What does that mean? What does reason mean?
A mutual understanding.
A hope of a mutual understanding.
Yeah, the hope.
Discussion.
A discussion. What kind of discussion?
One where books are opened and they're reading parts of it to determine what it means.
There you go. He's taking books, he's taking things that is said in the Old Testament, and he's taking things of Christ, and he's showing how they fit.
It's a defense.
It's a defense, but it's a yet, what is it not? It's not argument. It's taking what's there. Here's what's said. And the only thing he's relying on is what's said. And how it fits.
He would have had to listen to them also to know where they were.
He has to be willing to listen, but at the same time, he takes what fits. He's not getting what the thing of it is, we need to understand when the arguments came up, that's when Paul said, I'm done. He showed them the reason. And reason reasoning is a term that means logic. He's logically showing how everything's come together. And I'm not talking about a Greek term, I'm talking about a general term when we talk about reasoning, putting things that are logical in order. Now, and it doesn't show up, I think I'm up to it. If you see that stone there, you can probably make out a little bit of writing. It showed up good back there in my computer. There's a little bit of writing up there, and the reason that there is because what it's believed to be, and the writing that you can see at the last three letters are H-E-B. What's H-E-B? Huh? What? Christian school?
No, I said a grocery store.
Grocery, oh, no. Remember, it's in Greece, not in Texas. Huh? Hebrews. This stone is believed to be the door stone that was above the door of the synagogue. Now, what did I say? Believed to be. Okay? Now, and I've got a couple slides here just to show what's Corinth, the ruins, what the city looks like. This is looking back over the city. And if we were actually studying Corinthians, I'd probably bring out all of them. That hill back in the back, that mountain is solid granite. Guess what's on the top of that mountain? Well, not a church, but a temple. Temple of Poseidon. Corinth was a port city. Nero ordered a canal to be built through it to connect the two. The Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea. But the point before that canal, ships would come in from both sides. And everything would be transported back and forth. So it was a big merchant city.
It's the capital city of Achaia.
Yeah, it was the capital city of Achaia. And up on that hill was a temple of Poseidon. Guess what happened? And then you can understand a little bit more Corinth at that temple with the sailors. Prostitution and worship to Poseidon. And the funny part was, as I listened to this being told, the priestess that were in that temple professed themselves to be virgins.
First time of that Sabbath.
Huh?
First time of that Sabbath.
Maybe. But it makes sense. There also is, in the city, is a temple of Apollo. Now, we read in Acts 18, verse 5-6, when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is Christ. Now, here's the question. Did it say that he hadn't been preaching that before in the synagogue? Does it mean that?
It'd be a guess.
Hmm?
Wouldn't it just be a guess?
If he was reasoning from the scripture, what was he reasoning? He was reasoning about the Messiah coming and what had happened to Christ. So, but it may be that he became more forceful in his preaching. We're not really sure what that means, but that he more openly did it. Maybe just not reasoning in the synagogue, but reasoning at other times or bringing it in there. And that's the thing that it did. And I think what God is wanting us to do to get our idea of Paul, what happened at Thessalonica? Remember what happened at Thessalonica? After he preached and started converting people, what happened to Thessalonica? What happened to Paul? Then he goes to Athens. How well is he really received in Athens? Not the same turmoil, but at the same time, it's starting to get a little discouraging, perhaps. A little wonder what's going to happen to me next. Ever heard anybody say, if I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all? Or can it get any worse? And I think that's kind of where Paul was at, when he's kind of thinking, you know what, I've got to do what I got to do, but I don't know how safe I am. Not that it was going to keep him from preaching the word, but that point that he just got to the point that he was expecting trouble. Now, the interesting thing we have here mentioned that Silas and Timothy came to Macedonia, from Macedonia. Some agree, and I think that Silas probably came from Berea, and Timothy came from Thessalonica. But they came at the same time. Remember when those at Berea had escorted him to the ship that he called going to Athens, he sent them back with word to send them. Yes, sir.
I'm looking back at that verse. Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is Christ. To me, could it possibly be that it became a little more personal?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think again, the confidence building was more personal. It was more forthcoming.
Because I'm thinking of
Instead of trying to guide people, I think it became a blatant message.
And it's to the Jews.
Yeah, and to the Jews.
And testified is a little bit of a stronger word as far as
Reasoning.
almost like he is swearing. You know, Jesus is.
Here's the thing we need to realize. When he's reasoning in the synagogue, I think it's an open dialogue what we have right now, back and forth. Okay? When he gets to this point, it's preaching.
And maybe to more official Jews.
Yeah,
That
more official.
have more-
And so it's not a sit-down discussion, it's an open, here we are. Okay? And then notice what happens. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Every time I read this verse, I think about Ezekiel 33. God tells Ezekiel that you're the watchman. So when the watchman over a city sees trouble and sounds the alarm, whoever doesn't respond, their blood is on their own head. But if he fails to give forth the cry of the alarm, then their blood is required of him. And that's what he tells Ezekiel. You're the watchman. You're to tell these people what they're to do. If you don't, I'm going to require their blood on you. But if you tell them they don't respond, it's their responsibility. So it's the same thing that Paul's saying. You reject it, it's your own fault if you're lost.
Well, that's when people become opposed to the preaching, because your blood's on your head, but they don't understand this. You're proclaiming now.
Yeah.
You're proclaiming, and you're authorized to do that. And the brethren's not going to accept it, and so they will be opposed to it, but they don't understand. They need to understand.
You want to know something ironic? I just looked at my Bible and it's open to Ezekiel 33. And plain it that way. But here, you're right. And people don't understand it. And what they'll do is say, well, you're judging. No, I'm telling you what God has said for you to be saved. And if you reject it, how can you be saved? And your rejection is pronouncing judgment upon yourself.
But then they tend to look at the man.
Yeah, they won't look at the man and blame the man. And that's the thing. So he says, okay, I'm done with y'all. I'm going to the Gentiles. Now, notice, I love the place where he goes to. And he departed from there He's a Christian. We don't read anything as converted. I don't know if he was converted by Paul when Paul first got there, but the obvious that he is a Christian. That's what Luke often uses that of people trying to search and serve God properly. And usually when we see it, well, then they become Christians later on. But here we don't have any mention of that, so I think he had already became a Christian, and I'll get some other reasons later. Now notice, whose house was next door to the synagogue. You don't like my preaching, so I'm going to go right here next door and start preaching. Get your Gentile convert. But notice this point. Then Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. So here's Crispus. You just converted the guy in charge. Wonder how the Jews felt about that. Sometimes we get the idea some people are unreachable, but it reminds us that a person of a pure heart who wants to be right with God is reachable. No matter who they are or what their background. And this had to be encouraging to Paul, but at the same time, I guess I put that in there twice. There are some questions that come up. In verse 9 we read, "Now the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision, do not be afraid, but speak and do not keep silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in this city." Now here's the question, who's the people he's talking about? Is he talking about those already converted? Huh? Are only all those who are already converted? Or are you talking about those who are ready to receive the gospel as well? It's probably both. Not because Paul already knew how many had been converted and how many were believing and how many. So here's the point here. It's not stopping here. But here's another thing that he's telling him. Let's go back. What happened in Thessalonica when he departed from the synagogue?
People that didn't like them traveling ahead or with them to badger him the next time.
Well, they badgered him then. They turned against him. They attacked him. They did what they could. Then they also followed him to Berea. So when you're at this point, when you get that point, I'm going to the Gentiles, and this has happened in almost every city you've been in. What do you expect to happen? You start looking for it. In fact, what does Paul tell Timothy? All who live godly shall suffer persecution. I think that Paul at one point decided that persecution was a way of life for him. Being persecuted. And the Lord's trying to tell him, you don't have to worry about persecution here. No one is going to hurt you.
Do you not, maybe where it says, for I have many people, maybe he means, for I have many people who need to hear your message.
Well, that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm saying. It's not just those that have been converted, but those that are willing to hear and be converted. So God is telling you, you've got many people that are going to help you, that are willing to hear you. And they're my people. Now, here's the truth of the matter. Are the future converts Christians? How about in the mind of God? They haven't become Christians yet, but God says they're going to be, so they're my people. He's counting them already. Because he knows who's going to listen, who's going to convert, who isn't. And I think that's the point there that we need to consider. Because sometimes we get confused with God because we read some of the things that he puts in past tense, some things in future tense, some things in present. And this is present tense. I have many people in this city.
But he still has to push forward. He has to still keep working in order to encourage them also to come out. If there's somebody to be converted.
And that's the thing. And Corinth wasn't a small city. In fact, I figured out walking it that it's probably about a half mile to 3/4 mile square. Just the ruins that they've uncovered. I don't think that was the end of it. Some of the larger city marshals have been built on top of the other. So there's a point there. Okay? Now notice this. How long was he there? So he continued there a year and 6 months teaching the word of God among them. So Luke kind of jumps forward, says, here's the time span he was there. How long was he at Thessalonica? We know he was in the synagogue 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Luke tells us he went to the synagogue. For 3 Sabbaths. So 3 to 4 weeks in that time frame. Berea seems like it's only 2 or 3, if that many. Athens were really kind of unsure, but now here he spends a year and a half. That's the most he's ever been anywhere at this time. So there had to be that great comfort and that great peace. But toward the end, what did I do? I don't know what I was doing there. I got a lot of double slides. In verse 12, we read, when Gallo was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, this fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. Was that true? Absolutely. They understood Christianity was not going to be following the law as they read it. It wasn't going to be worship God. There was no more having to go back to Jerusalem unless you chose to. There was no more animal sacrifices having to be made. Christ was up. That was true. But notice at this point here that, what are they fed up with? This is toward the end of that year and 6 months, that 18 months. What are they tired of? I want you to think about this. You have the synagogue of the Jews, and you have Justice House, which is most likely being used as the church, and Paul is teaching from there. What's happening here? What do they see?
Growth.
They're seeing the growth. Those many people that Paul's been reaching out to and preaching. And every Sabbath they're coming together, and every first day of the week they're coming together, and they're seeing their little group, and they're seeing this bigger group keep going and growing, and they're hearing about it. And I'm sure some of those Jews are sitting there questioning their old proselytes, potential proselytes, and going, and they're going, well, wait a minute, what we're being taught here is this. And that's what we're believing. And they knew from Paul having been there what he was teaching. Now, this here is the judgment seat. Top of that wall was where a gallows would sit. Doesn't look like it's that big a deal, right? That's my mom and stepdad. My stepdad was about 6'4". You see where his head is standing off from that? When you're up there against it, you're looking like this. Now, what's really interesting, and I don't know what happened to the picture of it, is there's a little capital over there in front of that judgment seat that has loops in it, chain loops. And this stands about 1.5 foot off the ground, the top of it. And what they would do is bring you in chains before the judgment seat, and they would put those chains through those loops and pull you down where you're on your chest, looking up like this. The reason I bring that up, when Paul writes to the Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians 5, where we all must stand before the judgment seat of Christ, that's the vision that came in their mind. Not standing, but pulled down, bowing, looking up. That's what happened to Paul that day. But the interesting point is, notice, when Paul was about to open his mouth, God said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crime, O Jews, there would be reason why I should bear with you. But if it is a question of words and names and your own law, look to yourselves, for I do not want to be a judge of such matters, and drove them from the judgment seat. Now, if you were Paul and you hear all this before you can even try to offer defense, are the words of the Lord coming back to you? Don't fear. There's many people. Now, here's the interesting part. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallo took notice of these things. Who's Paul's accuser? The Jews. To them, who's the chief Jew? Ruler of the synagogue, the guy in charge. So they're like, you're messing with this, and it has no meaning to us, so they beat him. And it would almost say that the rest of the Jews kind of stood back and watched, or left. So Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He had his hair cut off at Chipsia, for he had taken a vow. Okay? So now he's leaving. Who is Sosthenes? Who is Sosthenes? What happened to Sosthenes? He got beaten, but notice this. When Paul writes his first letter to Corinth, his secretary, we know Paul had a habit of using people as secretaries, was Sosthenes, and he says, our brother. Now, we can't say definitively that this is the same Sosthenes, but it was a common name. So, the thought of it would be if somebody reached the opinion, like our Paul said, he was converted, we really didn't argue with it. We didn't say, no, he wasn't. You might say, well, I haven't reached that conclusion. But we can't say that conclusion is wrong. Because he's mentioned here, and we want to think about who's Paul writing this letter to? The Corinthians. Who better to be his secretary than one of their own? So here's the things we should consider that happened while in Corinth. He lives with Aquila and Priscilla and establishes what seems to be a lifelong relationship with them. In fact, when he writes the book of Rome, he says, the letter to Rome, he says to greet them. He remembers it. While there is when he writes 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Belief is this is around 52, 53. We know through reading the letters that both letters were sent back by Timothy. This is the last mention of Silas in the book of Acts. So it's possible that when Paul left, as Luke said, went to Ephesus, he only mentions Aquila and Priscilla going with him. So it's possible that Silas was left with the church in Corinth for a time of preaching. Just like Luke had been left in Philippi. And I wouldn't question somebody if they came to that decision, because they're kind of that point. Here's a question. Let me throw this out to you. Now, in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Sabanius is the way it's mentioned, is his secretary, is when he's dictating the letter to. Is it mentioned in any other books? Any other letters? Ron's shaking his head no. Anybody else want to jump on that wagon?
There's times when he mentions Sylvanus, and some people think that may be.
It is rendition. It's a form of the word Silas. Some translations sit there and turn it into Silas. Some translations. Now, but there's all, and the reason for that is it's mentioned that way in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. It's not mentioned as Silas. I did the word search today because I'm sitting there like, wait a minute, I know it's somewhere. And I started, and what I actually did was I started going to every letter, looking at the first and the last, and some of them he signed at the end, the secretary.
I only have him mentioned in Acts.
Okay, as Silas. But then you have Sabanius mentioned in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and you have him mentioned in one other place. 2 Peter chapter 5, when Peter closes out the letter. And he says, I, Sabanius, who wrote this letter. Okay, so it's that saying, it most likely is Silas. And Sabanius is just another form of his name. So, but it's the last he's mentioned in Acts. Last he's mentioned being with Paul. But it doesn't mean that his work ended there, because the next thing we know, toward the end, he's with Peter. So, and where did he come from? Originally. Jerusalem. So and he went to Antioch with that letter as a witness from the apostles and the elders of the church of Jerusalem. So he was a known person. So that thing, where he went, where he point, and here's the truth. Do you just leave a church without somebody to guide it? If you can. Do you just leave a church without somebody to guide it if you have a choice? Yeah. So here's Silas that can be left at Corinth. And even though we're not told it, we don't see him anywhere else. Like Luke, we know the pronouns Luke used in Philippi. When he gets there, we, when they leave, he goes they. He changes pronouns, but it indicates he's there. And we don't see him again until Paul's starting to go back to Jerusalem the last time on his 3rd missionary journey.
He was in Rome with Paul.
He was in Rome with Paul, but my point is, but last we see him in Acts is in Philippi, and then he joins him on his journey back on his 4th journey. So now you have conversion of Crispus, Gaius, and the household of Stephanus mentioned. Okay, we read of Crispus in Acts, but in 1 Corinthians 1:14-16, Paul says, I thank God that I baptized none of you except Crispus and Gaius, lest anyone should say that I baptized in my own name. Yes, I also baptized the household of Stephanus. Besides, I do not know whether I baptized any other. So there are others that are believing. We see Paul's preaching, and we see those many believing. If Paul only baptized these, who baptized the others?
Any of the other members?
Any of the other members? Silas, Timothy. After these were baptized, Crispus, Gaius. But here's the other question. Does it have to be a baptized believer to baptize somebody?
No, it doesn't have to be.
Some argument is that it does have to
Some
be.
argue that it does.
Huh?
Baptize someone you're asking, like, you don't even believe it.
Well, okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Now, it's hard to ask somebody that don't even believe to baptize you into something you believe, right? Okay, so let me tell you a story.
Well, it's the mindset of the person being baptized.
Now, there's the first thing. The baptism is on the mindset of the person being baptized. It is not on the person baptized. But now, let me tell you a story. True story. Thomas Campbell, Alexander Campbell. Thomas is here. He's questioning things that's being taught by the Presbyterian Church because they close communion. And he reaches the conclusion that one must be baptized for the remission of sins. Okay? He is the one to believe, to have coined the phrase, when the Bible speaks, we will speak, and when the Bible is silent, we will be silent. He has a son, Alexander Campbell, also in the Presbyterian Church, in Presbyterian Seminary over in Scotland. He's studying with teachers. And him and those teachers come to the conclusion that a Christian must be baptized for the remission of sins, immersed from study of the Scriptures. Letters are being corresponded. Alexander is coming to America. Thomas is worried about how Alexander is going to accept what he teaches him. Alexander, at the same time, is worried if Thomas is going to accept what he's come to realize. They come together. They both are in complete agreement, but neither one of them has yet to be immersed. So what do? They find the only preacher that believes baptism is immersion, and makes him take him down to the river and makes him say, which he did not want to do, that he was baptizing him in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit for the remission of sins.
Yeah, because I guess the way I was thinking, I've known people who were baptized. They were baptized and they were fully immersed, but not for the right reasons. Later on, they come about understanding.
And we'll get to that in a couple of chapters.
So if it's a female.
Here's the thing that hit me when I was studying that preaching school. Why did he end up preaching?
For their own peace of mind.
For their own peace of mind. Because he was no more a member of the church than they were, so in that mindset, they could have baptized each other. And it comes back to this. It is not what the one who's doing the baptizing believes, because this guy did not believe in baptism for remission of sins at all.
Answer her question.
Who's?
So if there was a female, she could baptize and everything would be fine.
Why not? If that's all that's available, why not? Huh? What if it's another female she's baptized? Would you have a problem with that? What if she's the only member of the church?
make sure they understand what the baptism's for, and they have to do some type of teachings or whatever, then that couldn't be right.
Huh?
By analyzing it.
Well, it's-
Well, we're gonna get in that a little bit too, now, because you think about Will and Priscilla, and it's like, one guy told me that Priscilla was quiet.
Couldn't say that.
happens in China, Al.
That happened in China.
There, you know, there's most of the members are women, and what men are there are not leader quality, or has not been baptized in Christ. So, I mean, you know, who does it communion for them?
And David Lipscomb's writing. He got a letter. This was when he was doing the gospel advocate. He was the editor, and he printed that letter. Was so bold enough as to put where this was. And there were a bunch of women who had been converted, and they were worshiping. They had a building that they were worshiping in. And they were doing everything, because that's all they were. They were leading singing, they were preaching, they were serving the community, they were teaching classes, so they did have their kids there. Well, some of the husbands got converted. Guess what they refused to do? To stand up and take their roles. So they had to go. David listened and said, what are we to do about this? Because we don't want to take authority over men that we don't have. Guess what David Lipscomb printed for them to do? Tell them, go home till they're willing to be the Christians they're supposed to be and do what God expects them to do, so you can worship in spirit and truth.
But they did have to stay away from the worship.
It's basically getting those men out of there,
Because they couldn't do it with them in there, right?
because they couldn't do it with them in there since they were converted. Basically, how would you like to be looking at a gospel advocate knowing you're being shamed? It's like step up to the plate.
But it doesn't necessarily matter what David Lipscomb says.
It doesn't, but he
What
said,
God thinks about it.
okay, here's the thing about it. What does God say about women having authority over men? So it's basically, here's realization. Those men have either got to step up to the plate or let them women worship in spirit and truth.
Is it better to have a scripturally unorganized church or an organized, unscripturally organized church? That argument.
What's scripturally unorganized about a bunch of women worshiping together and doing that?
That's how this works.
Okay? Because here's what you have. You have women doing it right. You got men who don't want to do it right. To let the men sit there, here's now you've got the unorganized. Spiritually unorganized.
The word you used was they were using their authority over the men. If the men took no role in those, and they were not acting that way, there's no authority over them.
Okay, who's preaching?
If the women preach, the men were,
Who's it where the men?
they're not doing it.
Is preaching a role of authority?
It should be. It is.
Okay, so if they're sitting there, they're exercising authority over that man. They didn't take it, it was being thrust upon them, but it still wasn't right. The King James Version translates what Paul says in 2 Timothy as not to usurp authority over men. The word there literally means not to have authority over men.
But it's great that they understood that.
They did, and those women understood that they were not to be doing that. And so here's the thing. So either the men get up and do what's right, or the men go home. That's what he told them. Now, you're right. David Lipscomb gave his opinion from what he believed in the scriptures. Personally, I think he was right. Personally. We have a responsibility to do the best job. Guess what? I may not be able to carry a tune in the bucket, but if I'm the only man there, guess what I need to be doing?
There's some congregations.
The best I can.
The man sang, preached, and did the Lord's Supper because he was the only one.
Yeah,
At the time with Welsh,
I've seen the time where it came out, the song leader was gonna be gone one Sunday, and another guy was supposed to lead the singing. That morning, I get a phone call. Taught Bible class, I did the announcements, I did the opening prayer, I led singing, I waited on the table, and I preached the sermon. There were a couple other guys that were on the table, and somebody else led the closing prayer. Sometimes, if that's what you got to do, that's what you do. What do you think happened at Philippi? All they converted initially were women, from what we see. So, fortunately for Paul, it was him, Luke, Silas, and Timothy. So, we have to understand, we need to take these things and we need to understand them and understand how they can lead to other people's conversion. Guess what happened when those ladies responded to David Liscombe 4 months later? The men had taken charge of the service, had stepped into the roles that God expected of them to. Somebody just had to point out, you're not doing what's right before God. And we're not going to let you pretend that you are. So, next week, we'll start with Ephesus. What's your invitation song? Do you know my Jesus? That's a point that I've got to write on paper on, so to speak. Preaching of Jesus. What it means to preach Jesus. Part of it. So, let's stand and sing. Have your hearts as weary, sing of care. Are you the soul that's seeking rest from the burden you bear? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard he loves you, and that he will abide till the end? Where does your heart, O pilgrim? What does your mind reveal? Who turns your call for comfort when darkness sorrow you feel? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard he loves you, and that he will abide till the end? Prove your disappointment, prove it each time you cry. Who understands your heartache? Who dries those tears from your eyes? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard he loves you, and that he will abide till the end?
want to thank Al for that provocative lesson. That's what we need to be able to